Good evening. It's Monday, August 7th, 2023. Welcome to episode 31 of Porterhouse and Teal Live. Joining me tonight is Bobby Spags from Spags Unfiltered.
What's up, folks?
Yeah, I was expecting also to have Patrick from Getting Deep with Data on tonight, but he had some late breaking business he had to attend to, so he's not going to be joining us tonight. But yeah, man, welcome, Bobby. Good to have you on.
Thanks for having me back. It's been a while, and I'm always happy to see you.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, this is actually your third appearance on the broadcast. So, yeah, I was going to bring both of you guys on and have a little prepper roundtable. And being the fact that you guys have been in the preparedness community for a very long time, a number of years, both of you collectively and independently, I kind of wanted to just get your take on a few topics that are kicking around in the news and maybe shed some light on how we can navigate through some of those things. Sure. And then just kind of kick it around and see what kind of a conversation we have tonight. But okay. If you will, Bobby, I know this is your third time on the broadcast, but if you will, just kind of give folks a little bit of introduction into those that may not be aware of who you are and what you do.
Sure. I'm Bobby Spags. YouTube handle is Spags Unfiltered. I really don't do much with my channel these days. I don't really have the time because I'm a prepper and I'm always busy. Myself and Patrick, the guy who was going to be on here with me tonight, we run the Midwest Preparedness Project here in the Midwest, here near Topeka, Kansas. Our next event will be October 2nd through the 8th. At Perry Lake. You can find all that information at midwestpreparednessproject.com or all of our social media of the same name. I was Army for 16 years, military police officer. I was a private security contractor for 4 and then a military contractor for 3. I worked for the United States House of Representatives for 8 years as a State Department and Army Corps of Engineer and immigration caseworker. And now I work as a private contractor pretty much for myself and I do consulting for different companies. And I spend most of my time over at EMP Shield right now, working with them and the Midwest Preparedness Project. Been prepping since 1997. So years before Y2K, years before it became a buzzword and years before it really became popular. And now I do things like this and hang out with cool people like you.
Right on. Well, welcome tonight. And one of the things that a lot of people have been asking is just how to build community. And I know that's a big topic of discussion. And being somebody who's in the preparedness mindset, you can't do everything by yourself. You need others around you. So right. in the vein of building community, what's your take on in a community, in a group, so to speak? Are you in favor of having a group with rules or no rules?
I'm in favor of having a group for sure, and I'm in favor of structure. I am an anarchist, but I'm not the kind of anarchist that thinks that people should just run around doing whatever the hell they want, whenever the hell they want, even though, that's kind of it. But the idea is to temper that with structure. And the idea is that a true anarchist also doesn't want to become his own worst enemy and put his foot in holes he created by just being an idiot. I do believe in hierarchies. I do believe in rules. I do believe that there has to be structure. There's never been a society that ever succeeded for any length of time without some set of structure in place, without some hierarchy in place. You can look at societies like the Brehons, which lasted almost 1,000 years as pretty much a libertarian anarchist society, but they still had a king and they still had rules and they still had a pitiful military for whatever it was. And it was designed to make sure people didn't move fence posts, essentially. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm definitely in favor of having some sort of structure. Now, whether it's a looser structure or a tighter structure really is kind of up to your group. It's really up to the kind of people you decide to pack up with. A good chunk of the people in my group, like me, are former military. And so, even though, decades ago when we started our group, we were all way more law and order, way more, rah, 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 flag waving, patriot types than maybe we are now. But the lessons learned in that sort of an environment don't fade. There's a reason that professional institutions have rules and hierarchies, and the ones that don't just kind of fade away and turn into mush.
Right. Well, what things, as far as like in a society, in a closed society or a group or whatever, how you want to define it, what rules do you hold to enforcement?
The very basic ones: don't kill, don't rape, don't steal, and it's pretty much everything can be ancillary around that. Um, and I want to clarify: the word rule and law doesn't mean the same thing, right? Laws are just scribblings that politicians put on paper, and they're nothing more than that. It's a legal term defining your relationship to an out of control government. A rule is something that people come in together and communally agree upon. Um, so you can easily understand why you would have rules like you can't kill people, and there will be security measures in place to make sure you don't kill people.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same point, in a free society, most of the onus of not being killed is kind of on you, right? You carry your gun in society, you open carry, you conceal carry, you own guns, you don't go down the wrong street at night. You make good choices, and that's where kind of the anarchism comes in, where you're free to make those choices. But there are definitely consequences. And so as a society, you definitely form rules to mitigate the consequences as much as you can in the least invasive way possible.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, private property rights are a big deal for non-leftist anarchist types, and I am a non-leftist anarchist. So I very much believe in private property rights. And so I do believe that, if you form a group, you have to have certain understandings in place by which you have both ownership within the group and ownership without of the group. So, for example, in my group, we have a monetary system where everybody has to vest themselves, and that way everybody has skin in the game. Everyone pays, let's say for the sake of argument, without getting into the details, let's say I have a family of 6 and the rules say I have to pay $10 per month per person. That means I pay $60 a month for my family. If those were the numbers, I'm using round numbers to make it easy. And let's say that maybe we have a investment period of 10 years. And so you pay that for 10 years, and after 10 years, you're done and you're totally vested. And that's a good decade of paying, a decade's worth of paying. And that creates an environment where people have ownership in something, and therefore they have the desire to make it work, and they have the desire to mitigate arguments and get past the fracturing things that destroy most groups.
Right.
But at the same point, the rule doesn't mean that if you have a hard month and you can't pay, then you don't pay, and that's what the vestment period is for. It allows for grace, and that's where just rules come in. You have to allow for grace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's pretty wise in the sense that I think that if people want to belong to something, people want to, hey, I'm in this group or I'm in this association or whatever, but yet a lot of times the level of participation is maybe not to the extent that is really indicative of somebody who's actually in the group. You're in the group, but you're never there, or you're not really participating at an equal amount or an equivalent amount to other folks. So how do you address that as far as kind of falling along the lines of the Pareto principle, where 80% of the people or 20% of the people do 80% of the work? How do you address that imbalance?
You will never get away from it, no matter how strict or not strict your group rules are. You will always run into that problem, which is why I think the only way to address it is monetarily. So, for example, let's say shoot him in the head. Chuck is in the house. Let's say you're one of those 80% that only does the bare minimum. If you're still paying your $10 per person per month, and those funds are going towards the communal storehouses, to the ammunition, to the food, to the medicine, to the ham radios, to whatever, you're still in effect contributing, even if not with your blood, sweat, and tears, for periods of time. And we've had some members, including myself at one point, that I was on prepper burnout for a good year, man. We've been doing this for almost 20 years in this particular group that I'm in right now. And at some point you get burnout. So I kept paying my dues, and I didn't show up for a while. And I told everybody, I had the decency to let them know in writing, hey, I'm not going to be here for a while. I just need a break. I'm not leaving. I'm still very much invested in this group, but I'm just going to pay my way for a year. And I did. And for a year, I took that off and I focused on family and I focused on my property and I focused on some of the things that had kind of gone to the wayside. It's kind of, as much as I hate to make this analogy, it's the lawsuit mentality, right? Like the only way to make things right is to pay absorbent sorbs of money, because at least then you're still in the game. And so that's why I think you have to have a pretty robust, I'm going to use the term, I can't use this term legally, but dues program. And you can't really say dues unless in most states, unless you're paying taxes, but I don't know what other way to say it. You pay your way, right? You're paying your club participation fee, whatever buzzword you want to use, so you don't get in trouble with the gaming commission or whatever. If you have that in place, at least they're contributing something. And then at some point, if they're not contributing time or money, then you realize you actually have a problem, because one can take the place of the other temporarily.
Yeah, I fully embrace that idea. I think it's a really good idea. Do you guys have a cap on the amount of funds that are within the in your, say, your bank account?
We like to be money poor, asset rich. So, when it starts to get to a certain point, the elected leadership of the group will start to come up with ideas. Let's do this as a group purchase. Let's do that as a group purchase. Let's do this as a group purchase. And that just takes a majority vote. And 9 times out of 10, everybody agrees anyway. Yeah, this is a good idea. So we use the money. We'd like to keep a certain amount in the safe, because, well, you never know when a good deal shows up. But for the most part, we try to be way more rich with assets than we do with cash.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. I think that having skin in the game is the biggest asset, because it's easy to say that you're in the group or you're a part of it and you show up occasionally or whatever, but you're really not participating at a level that makes your spot in that group worth having. Because I don't know, most groups, at least in my opinion, typically limit the number of people they allow into that inner circle. And I think that it's important to do that, just because to keep the numbers small, it's a lot easier to manage a fairly smaller group than having this large, huge organization that's a bunch of numbers, but you don't have any cohesiveness or good communication. And I think a lot of it just boils down to being able to talk amongst men and women to sort out any issues that you have. I think the communication is one of the biggest issues and hurdles that we have to, overcome as people, really. People hold shit inside, and then they, feelings get hurt or things are misunderstood. So I think that's one of the things that can really go a long way to trying to get to the bottom of some things. And it's challenging. I will acknowledge.
And you touched on something there when you mentioned how there's only so many people allowed on the inner circle. What I would say is if you have a group, that group has to be entirely composed of your inner circle. You can't have a group with different layers. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to let somebody hold your children's survival in their hands, should you die, they have to be part of your inner circle. And that means the most uncomfortable part of this is you have to be willing to expand your inner circle as time goes on. My group, the median age is like mid-40s, man. We're getting old. We're getting crusty and we're getting broken, and our knees are starting to go out and our backs are starting to get bad and blah, blah, blah. You have to bring in fresh blood as time goes on. And to do that, you have to be willing to become uncomfortable a little bit and put yourself out there and start talking to people outside of the same 4 people you talk to every day. And I would argue that there should be nobody in your actual group who's not inner circle. Now kids, obviously, then there have been, and I'll caveat that with there's also, spouses that you have to take into consideration. Early on, most of us were still single. I was one of the only people that was married at the time. And my wife instantly has to be a member, because I'm not going to be a part of something where I have to hide something from her. But most of the other guys were engaged or dating, and their girlfriends weren't allowed to know. Now, once they were engaged and they were serious, they were about to get married, all of a sudden, okay, now we have to talk about bringing that person in. And that's always a dance, right? Hey, come on into this coffee for coffee with friends, dear. And also there's, 30 people there, all looking and grimacing. And, there's an AR-15 leaning up against the wall and probably a "Don't Tread on Me" flag or whatever, right? Everyone's in camo, whatever the case may be. Not that we did anything that stupid, but you get the point, right?
Yeah.
You got to learn how to mitigate those issues too and bring in the new folks.
Yeah, I think it's important that people might consider, if they're listening to this now and they're thinking at any point in the future, they're thinking of, hey, I would like to get some kind of a tight knit community, a tight knit group of folks built together. I think it would benefit them if they went and they watched the series that you were a part of, put on by Tag at Life Done Free, because what he wound up talking about, and you guys wound up talking about, is those circles, those
Yes.
concentric circles that
Mhm.
are
Right.
small, and then they expand out, and then it's even further. And so it's important to have an understanding of the relationships that can and should and need to exist within those different levels
Right.
before you wind up assembling a group of folks, because what will happen is you will wind up getting a bunch of people together, and then you'll realize, well, gee, there's a lot of other intricacies here
Mhm.
that we didn't consider, and we
Right.
probably should have ironed these things out ahead of time. So I would
Right.
just encourage anybody that may be listening to this and thinking about possibly building community, maybe go and listen to that. It's pretty well done, and I enjoyed, um, you know, having the opportunity to watch those and learn from them. So yeah, cool, man.
Yep.
So yeah, there's always a list, I guess. There's always a list of concerns that people have, um, what they're preparing for. If you're a prepper, right?
Yep.
There's zombie apocalypse, there's nuclear war, there's, a pandemic, there's this, there's that, there's the other thing, and there's all these things, and you can't necessarily prepare for all of it.
Right.
You can try to find out what is your biggest concern, and but it's always kind of like a moving target, I think. So
It
what
is.
is your what's your biggest concern, I guess, looking forward at this point in time, what you would be considering as top of your list?
The inevitable collapse of the Western paradigm. And that's going to encompass economic collapse, societal collapse, cultural collapse. And that means that in that void that the West has held for so long, there will be someone that will fill that void. And you're going to watch the East rise. And I think it'll be a very dangerous time. I think it'll be a very tumultuous time. And yet at the same point, I feel like it will be a time of excessive prosperity and hope for those who plan accordingly. And I think if you plan for the absolute collapse of your own society, you will prepare for everything else. They used to say if you prepped for a zombie apocalypse, you've prepped for everything. And it's kind of true. If you think about all the things that would go wrong, or all the things that would no longer be there, or the things you would really need to stock up on, or the deficiencies in your own plan, um, zombie apocalypse literally covers it all, even though there's probably no such thing, right? You have burning cities, you have crowded highways, you have shortages in the supermarket, you have medical supplies that you can't get a hold of, you have lack of communication, the electrical grid goes down. It all happens in that scenario. So if you take that scenario, or the collapse of society scenario, and just peg it one little bit at a time and start to break it down, I think you can come up with a fairly good strategy to tackle prepping, and you'll be able to start to prioritize where to begin. If you're new, or if you're at level 3, you can learn how to get to level 4, so on and so forth.
Hmm. Yeah, I think for me, man, thinking about moving forward, it's one of the biggest threats that I see looming, and it's something that I don't have an answer for necessarily, but it's the collapse of the economic system.
Yep.
And I really think that that's inevitability, just by the fact that it hasn't really been addressed how we're going to pay off all of the mounting debt that just continually is rising out of control. And so let me pose this to you. If, like, let's say you went to bed tonight and tomorrow you woke up and there was some kind of an event that happened overnight, and it caused the powers to be, the gatekeepers, to institute central bank digital currency overnight, and all of the things that we had been reading about over the past couple of years with the restrictions that would be in place, and your spending limits, and everything would be tracked, and all of that sort of thing how are you or any of us really going to necessarily deal with a system that's heading down that road?
You will have to participate at some level. And that's step one, is accepting the fact that unless you live on a mountain and you are 100% not tied to anything, you will have to participate. And so you have to prepare with participation, at least limited participation in mind. No matter how much you stack stuff, if they turn off your ability to buy, you're going to blow through what you've stacked. It might take you a year. It might take you 2 years. If you have a family of 4, it might take you 3 months. If they're instituting drone programs like they do now for assessing your property or your property value, they fly drones over all the time over your house, whether you notice it or not. They're going to know if you have a garden. They're going to know if you have animals. They're going to know if you have livestock. And you can only buy so much camo netting to throw up over it before you realize that you've just shaded your whole yard and you've killed your garden. So you have to prepare, understanding that at least on some basic level, you will have to participate. If you don't own your home outright, you will have to figure out how to engage in the CBDC system to make your house payment, or you will lose your house. BlackRock and Vanguard and the World Economic Forum are not going to sit there and just ignore you because you stop making your housing payments or your rent payments or your utility payments because you got caught with all this before your house was paid off, or before you went completely solar, or before you went completely rainwater, or before you went completely geothermal. In the real reality of things, most preppers can't do all those things. Most preppers are middle class and below. And that's just the reality of it. Most people can't do these big elaborate homesteads.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be prepared to partially engaged in CBDC. And I would do so under duress, understanding I was now in a state of proxy war, at least on a psychological level. And the only point in which I would 100% disengage from the system, no matter what the consequences were, is the minute they require an implant. The minute they require something to be in my body and all purchases go through that, that's when I am gone. I'm done. I'm popping smoke. And at that point, I will have to live the Grizzly Adams lifestyle, hiding and ducking and running under bridges, because there are certain lines in the sand that I have, and invading my body with a RFID chip is absolutely one of those lines in the sand.
Yeah. You think that's something that you'll see in the future?
Yes.
You
They've
didn't
already
have much,
implemented
you
it.
didn't have much
Let
hesitation
me
there,
take that
Bobby.
back. They haven't implemented it. They've trial run it in several places. I mean, this is already happening. RFID implanting was happening right after 9/11. People just don't remember it.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really important. I think based on that, you're entirely correct in my opinion. You're going to have to participate because there's things that we need to purchase that we don't make as homesteaders and have as preppers. There's a level of things that we have to purchase and we have to participate in the system. So you can't completely detach. I agree with that 100%. And I think one of the important takeaways that people should take from that is to minimize the amount of things that you need to purchase.
Yes.
Try to for all of the things that you need that are the most important, your water, your food, your energy, your things like that you hold dearest, you shouldn't have to be tied to the system necessarily for those things. And that's been a big kind of concern of mine, is just the energy portion of that. And I'm still working on that to get entirely, I guess, off the system, so to speak.
Right.
So I just don't like the fact that somebody can shut my stuff off and then I don't have the ability to live my life like I want to live my life.
Sure.
In that level of comfort. So
are you willing to be uncomfortable now? This year, with the exception of a week and a half, we have not run the air conditioner, including 100-degree days.
Yeah.
And my family was sucking hind tit for a while. I was sucking hind tit for a while. It was not comfortable. It was hard to get to bed. You're sweating all night. Sheets are sticking to you. And we just implemented using house fans and the whole house attic fan for a while. We're back to doing it again now that one heat wave is over. And I understand that still requires electricity. And I'm not saying that by doing this, I'm planning to be energy independent, but I'm certainly preparing my family, and I am certainly preparing myself to be uncomfortable. Because if they do turn your stuff off, let's say they don't come for your house right away. Let's say they just turn your electricity and your water off. Are you prepared to go out and boil your water every day from your rain catchment system? Are you prepared to cook on an open fire in your backyard, whether it's December 13th or August 4th? Are you prepared for uncomfortable weather? Are you prepared to be cold? Are you prepared to be hot? Are you prepared to be humid? And if all you do is go around prepping and remaining in the creature comforts of your home and not forcing yourself to do things that are bitterly uncomfortable, then the shock is going to be much worse when they turn your stuff off. And you can do this now. I mean, there are little stupid things you can do every day to make the transition easier. I walk barefoot all the time, and I've got Washington blackberries in my yard with thorns everywhere. I get stung on the feet by bees every year, but I will force myself to walk in the snow out to the mailbox in the winter when there's snow. I will force myself to walk down the chip and seal road that I live on in the summertime when it's hot. And I will do things purposefully, and my family will do things purposefully that are uncomfortable. When's the last time you took a shower and kept your eyes closed the whole time and had to find everything from your soap to your shampoo to your conditioner to your beard treatment, whatever you're using, by feel? How many times have you been off balance in the shower where it's wet and slippery and just kept your eyes closed the whole time? And to make it real, you get soap all over your face, so you can't open your eyes. I do that regularly. And I can still take a shower in 5 minutes, get completely clean, and do so while being supremely uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's one of the downfalls that we as people have. We like to be comfortable, and there's nothing wrong with liking to be comfortable, but we never force ourselves to be uncomfortable until our backs are against the wall in most cases. And for some, when that happens, it's going to be a really big shock to them because they don't necessarily know what it's going to take to do the things they're supposedly think they're prepared for. Good case in point is, people who have the big rucksack or the bug out bag or whatever that weighs 45 fucking pounds.
Yeah.
And then they don't realize that if you had to move for any length of time, for any distance, your body is going to quickly break down. You might go out for an afternoon hike and feel like, oh, I busted out 8 miles and I feel pretty good. Go do that 3-4 days in a row. And I guarantee you by the 4th day, shit's going to really be hurting bad with all that weight. So it's very important to train with the things that you have and to kind of at least mentally prepare yourself for what is a possibility if those are things that concern you. I don't
comfort like a privilege and not like a right that's just to be assumed.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I haven't been out walking on berries, but I
avoid them, but you have to learn the step. You got to watch what you're doing. You can't be in your yard. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yep. Hey, so one of the things you guys wind up doing is you play that conflicted card game quite a bit, right?
We do.
Yeah. And it's a lot of different scenarios on there. I actually came up with a scenario of my own that I was going to present to you.
Okay.
And I'll let you kind of work this out. It may be one that you've already war gamed out because that conflicted game covers quite a bit of different scenarios. So I'll read this to you and you let me know what you would do in this situation.
Tags in the chat.
Uh-oh. All right.
He asked who's getting demonetized today.
Says you are in a grid down without rule of law scenario and your group has been severely impacted by injury and illness, with 4 of your members requiring surgical intervention and attention from a higher medical authority. One of your members is a surgeon. However, that individual was brought into the group for the skill set they possess alone and was not properly vetted and has been a disruption ever since they've been brought in. And furthermore, has committed an act so morally reprehensible that the majority of your group has voted to remove this individual, yet 2 of the 4 people injured are your loved ones. And there is a high degree of likelihood they will perish without receiving this person's care. How would you handle this?
Well, let's get the cautionary tale part of this out of the way first. This is the problem that comes from a lot of these prepper groups who recruit based on skill versus based on mindset. Don't build your group just by going out and finding random doctors and dentists just because you think you need a doctor and a dentist. Build a core group of people where this is not the issue, where you build on commonality and you build on common mindsets and philosophical foundations. And if you do that, your group will be healthy and you will then attract the doctor and you will attract the dentist. That's number one. Number two, I'll preface this by saying none of us know how we'll actually handle this until we're in it. This gets into that weird prepper porn area where it's, you are literally presenting a worst case scenario. So you have to look at this, that we can talk about it all day, but until it's your kid who's on death's doorstep, you really don't know. But I will say this, I would hope to God that the moral foundation that I have adopted, and that is my moral foundation, which, has only evolved, in my opinion, closer and closer to really good philosophy over the years, would guide me. And I think, again, one of the only potential solutions is an economic one, where one, does the doctor know that he's been voted off the island yet? Because if he doesn't know he's been voted off the island yet, then the economic decision would be not to tell him. You withhold that knowledge. You withhold the economics of the knowledge of what you're going to tell them later. And you have them do their job. It doesn't matter if they've done something morally egregious and you're going to kick them out. That doesn't change the fact that someone needs care. And by withholding that care, you're not making them atone for what they've done. You're punishing 2 innocent people for what they've done. So if they don't know that they've been voted off the island, let the surgery continue. And then when the surgery is over and continued care has been established of how it needs to happen, vote them off the island if that's what the group wants. But then you, as the person who is making the plea to keep them on a little longer, have to be able to economically convince your group of why you have to do that as well. Okay. And you may have to give up some of your stuff. You may have to, the group might say, well, what are you going to do for us in order for us to be willing to let this person stay for another week to complete the surgery and then continued care for a week? Option number 3, or point number 3, would be, if you're that far along into the apocalypse, I would hope to God that you would have more than just one person who could do some medical stuff at that point. I'd hope that you had a good network in place and you knew other mags and you knew other people that, you could rely on. And it wasn't just one dude in like 10,000 square miles that you had to rely on to do this. So if you have a mag, other groups that you interact with on a regular basis, even as you're making the decision to keep that person on for a day or a week or whatever, you should be reaching out to other groups with your comm systems and getting other medics to come to you if possible. And you could mitigate the whole issue that way. But like I said, man, that's a loaded question. And there's a lot of what ifs in there, including, like I said, whether or not he even knows he's been voted off the island. To me, that would be the linchpin for the whole thing going very well or getting ugly as hell really quick.
Yeah. You're right. It's not an easy question. I guess that's why I posed it to you, just because I wanted to kind of pick your brain on that, because there are a lot of layers to that, man. And you covered a lot of what needs to be covered, because that's a really important point, knowing that none of us really know what we're going to do until we're actually there. It's very easy to make assumptions sitting here in a room thinking about what ifs, but there's a lot of variables and a lot of different things that can come into play. So I think that's first and foremost.
Uh-huh.
And I would, I think personally, if there were no other groups to reach out to and that was the only option, obviously, as you pointed out, it's great to have other places you can go to serve that need. But if you didn't have that ability, my inclination would be to try to convince the folks who wanted him off, the majority of the folks in the group, to keep him on long enough to preserve life. And then that dude's gone one way or the other, whether that's you're voted off or you're something else, you're gone.
Something else. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
the real question is, what did they do that's that egregious, that morally egregious? Because there's only really two things I can think of that would fit that category.
I left it up to your interpretation on that. I didn't want to get too explicit, but there's
either they ended a life or they ended an innocence, one way or the other,
Yeah. Yeah. So I just wanted to shout out to a couple folks here. Chuck Peoples, how you doing this evening? Tag was in the house. Don't know if he's still here, but hey man, how you doing? Beth Emily, welcome this evening. And then hey, what's up, Bruce? Got Leather Homestead in the house. Yeah, that's a tough one, man. There's really no real easy one on that.
I want to point out something that Chuck said, if it's okay. He said groups should have layers and redundancies, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is why people like Chuck travel to all these different shows and put on medical classes. A little birdie might have told me that he might be somewhere in my neck of the woods come October to give such a class.
Mm-hmm.
Go to part of the redundancies I think Chuck is talking about is you should never have a group built where everything is reliant on one person for any particular set of skills. So that means it's kind of, think of the Army, right? As the war on terror progressed, the Army started to realize having just combat medics wasn't good enough. We had to have combat lifesavers. We had to have secondary medics. We needed to put 2 or 3 medics in each, per squad in a whole company. We needed those redundancies, right? So that if one medic goes down, you have another medic. And the same with your radio folks. If one radio man goes down, you have another one. If one of your mechanics goes down because, the fob took a mortar round, you have another mechanic. And so I really want to caution anybody watching tonight that if you're just getting into the preparedness thing and you're considering building a group, or even if you've started to build a group, don't get into this thing where you have like one dude or one woman who does one thing and they specialize in one thing, because now they can hold that over you. And if you didn't vet them correctly, as your scenario, certainly purports, now they have emotional terrorism and economic terrorism to hold over you.
Yeah. Succession planning is very important. It really is. That's one of the things that, like, when I was running hand crews, I used to run inmate hand crews, and you could come back in your swamper. The guy that rides next to you is called your swamper. He's kind of the guy that makes the most money. He's the guy that's your trusted ear. He's the top dog on the crew as far as an inmate's concerned. And so I would always make sure I had a backup ready to go, because I did not want to show up on Monday and realize my swamper was rolled up. And then now I got to like retrain somebody into that position. So I was always thinking for all the positions that I had within my crew, succession planning, it's super important. And that falls in just about all walks of life, really, and we talk about our systems, water redundancy, and all of those sorts of things, energy redundancy. It's very, very important to consider. So definitely a good point you brought up there, Chuck. What's up, Jake?
What's up, Grumpy?
Yeah, man. G's in the house. How you guys doing? What else do you want to talk about tonight, Spags?
Oh my gosh. Where do we even begin? I've been watching some of your biochar videos, of course, because that's one of my favorite things you talk about.
Right on.
So I'm learning that. I'm thinking about building some of the things I need to begin experimenting with that. Like I said earlier, the canning's been going heavy and hot this year. I'm trying to remove more and more of these things from, the Walmarts of the world that I have to go to them for. So after this year, I should not have to do tomato products or pickles from the store anymore. And that gets in line with eggs and meat and everything else I don't do from the store.
Right.
Oh God, what else is there to talk about? Lots of cool things coming up with Midwest preparedness. Some of the folks who are instrumental in that are in the chat tonight. And I don't want to give away too much yet because I haven't released our schedule of events, but let's just say that Tag and Chuck and Grumpy are all going to play very pivotal roles in the October festival. I believe Grumpy is on the road right now, actually, at some other festivals, spreading the good word. I know Tag's been traveling, spreading the good word. I see Chuck people. And that should be part of the clue for your question. This is how you network. This is one of the ways you can network to build those ancillary friendships, because there's a good chance, depending on how severe whatever situation you have is, you're not guaranteed to be in your bug out location or your home or whatever. You might become displaced. And if you're going to be displaced, maybe you should start finding other places to be displaced to. And by doing that, you can start working your way into the good graces and into the trust of some of these other groups, which is what the MAG is. The MAG is a loose confederation of multiple groups or multiple people who are willing to work together towards those common goals.
Right. And I think it's important also just to note as well that getting into those ancillary groups, one of the best ways you're going to do that is actually going to some of these festivals and meeting people and pressing the flesh and seeing them in real life, because it's very easy to sit on the other side of a computer screen and have an interaction with people, but you never get a chance to actually know that person and have a conversation in a more real way. So I think it's really important to go to these festivals. You guys are going to be having a festival. Jason down in Kentucky is going to be having a festival around that time. It's October. I'm going to be down there for that, teaching a class. And then also SRF is another great event. So all of those places are places that people can go to meet people, to become a part of the ancillary community that you were just speaking of.
And people will travel, man. Some of the hardcore folks, you can ask the folks, anybody in this chat right now who's been there, to any of those shows or events, is people will travel. We've had people from New York, New Mexico, Louisiana, South Carolina, Georgia, all coming out to Midwest. And some of the folks that we met in SRF came out to Midwest. We go to SRF. We'll be traveling to Kentucky Sustainable Living's Festival later this year, which comes after ours. In fact, I won't go into too much detail, but if you go on Midwest Preparedness's website, you'll see that there's now this thing called the American Preparedness Tour. And there are 3 shows, and Jason's show, Nicole's show, and our show are the 3 shows that are now part of the North American Preparedness Tour. And starting in 2024, there are plans for that to grow in and of itself and to become something really cool that will help motivate people to leave their comfort zones and get out and meet some folks.
Yeah. That's it's a way to invest in yourself, and I got prompted to do that from listening to Nicole Sauce, who was promoting her event, the Self-Reliance Festival. And I'm one of those type of people oh, I should go to that, I should, and then you just never pull the trigger on it. And then she was talking about it, and I just started to realize, you have to spend a little bit of time and invest in yourself to establish relationships. And that's what I wound up doing. And I feel much richer for it. So definitely I will be going back down there. I hope you're going to be bringing some brown drinks if you're going to be down there in Kentucky.
Always brown liquor, my friend. Always bad decision making. Think about it. You and I would have never met in person without these festivals. We probably wouldn't have known about each other outside of just YouTube.
Right.
So that's and now you and I have each other's phone numbers, and we call each other once in a while. We text each other with some funny memes. We're actually friends outside of just this weird, echo chamber of YouTube.
Right. I'll take it one step further, and I've said this before, but I think I never would have met any of you guys if it wasn't for the pandemic. 2020 was a blessing.
Oh, yes, for sure.
You know what I mean? For as much as it sucked for a lot of people, yeah, that sucks, but it didn't suck for me, because you gotta take something and make something good out of something
Yep.
shitty.
Yep.
And that's the way that I look at it, is that, yeah, I would have never had the opportunity that I'm having now to do the things that I'm doing. I wouldn't even made this choice to do what I'm doing had it not been for what they decided to do.
Yep. If it wasn't for
So
2020, I would still most likely be working at a shit job that I hate, for, pennies on the dollar, but, going towards a retirement I may never see,
right. Yeah.
and I certainly wouldn't have met most of you folks. I
Yeah.
knew a couple, I knew Tag prior to this, but there's been a lot of people I've met because, of Tag and my relationship. There's a lot of people I've met because of me and, John Willis's relationship, and a lot of people I've met because of some other folks. But most of that blossomed because of what happened after 2020.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%, man. I think it's really important to try to look and find the silver lining to certain things that are not so great for a lot of reasons. There's
Sure.
always a reason to find something good out of it,
Yeah, there's always a positive. Nature is very good at being balanced. There's always the dark and the light that comes with things, and the problem is most people don't see it because most people either get really spoiled being in the light all the time because of whatever set of circumstances thrust them there, and then you have people who are equally kind of reverse spoiled who never can see the positive part of life because all they ever face is adversity, generally speaking, because of a series of events that put them into that,
Mm-hmm.
into that way of life. But if you learn to kind of discern past that, you'll find out that there's generally something good hiding under everything bad, and there's generally something bad hiding around everything that's good. You just have to figure out how to mitigate it.
Right. One of the things I was gonna bounce off you, and it's something that I looked up on the internet because I heard somebody talking about it, and I wanted to see what I thought of it as far as whether or not it's true. I think that there's some validity to it, but I wanted to get your take on it. And
Sure.
it's the decline of the American male.
Huh?
And if you look that up, just type that in a search engine, decline of the American male, there's a whole list of different articles that you'll find on that, but you won't find any to the contrary. You won't find any that say the rise of the American male.
Right.
And so I don't know, quite honestly, if that's, how the media is. They want to push a story out or get some point across. They'll flood the internet with it or what have you. I don't know. Do you think that there's any truth to the decline of the American male?
Yes, there's
Mm.
absolutely a decline of the American male, and it comes from multiple areas. Masculinity has been attacked by many things. There's the obvious pariahs of the media, the government, the education system, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's set that aside and realize that there's even more to it than that. I mean, you have basically Bolshevik ideology that's been adopted not just by the political left in this country, but also by the political right in creating this massive nanny state. Well, the nanny state has had two, in my opinion, foreseen effects. One, that's single mothers on the rise, and two, overly materialistic men on the rise. And when you put those two things in concert, you're going to get a whole slew of boys who don't grow up with a dad, and they don't grow up with any strong male figures. Dad's out chasing, the monetary dream. He doesn't see his kids hardly ever. Or you're going to get the opposite where you have the single mom with multiple baby daddies with multiple kids from all of them, and none of them have a strong male figure. So I think that was actually the first real attack on masculinity, was the attack on fatherhood. Convincing women they don't need fathers in their lives, convincing men they don't need to be fathers, convincing everybody it's okay. And I'll piss some people off with this, but that's okay. They convinced you that the sole purpose of families wasn't to raise children, and that you could just flush unwanted children at will, as a biological mistake, and you can justify it because, oh, you weren't ready, and they would have been born into poverty, or they would have been born to blah, 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 name, fill in the blank. And so now women are convinced that it's a right to destroy life. Men are convinced I don't have to have protected sex because, well, they can just flush it at any time. And now there's this consequence-free mentality that has affected the male specifically. And I say it affects males specifically because males are much more impulsive in their decision-making than women are. And so when you teach men to raise the impulsivity by lowering the consequences that they will face, there's strike number one. Strike number two, obviously, is environmental, in my opinion. I think the stuff that's in your water, the stuff that's in your food, the stuff that's in your medications is obviously affecting the male brain at developmental ages. I think that now that we know for a fact that birth control does not biodegrade in municipal water supplies, and that estrogen and other chemicals affect developing embryos and young children in their drinking water supply, that certainly has had an effect. We can get into the conspiracies of what that means. We can get into the conspiracies of what's filtering in your sky, what's in your water, what's in your food. It's inconsequential, really, because you can't do anything about it unless you take life by the horns and grow your own damn food. But even there, you're still getting particulates coming from the sky that have effects on the developing mind. So that's strike two, is environmental. And then, of course, strike three is what I mentioned first, is, all these institutional attacks against masculinity. So yes, masculinity is certainly has been on the decline. I don't think it's a new phenomenon. I think that masculinity has been on decline really since the 70s, when men were convinced that it was okay to go out and just live the disco lifestyle and bed as many women as you want, throw morals to the wind, and who cares where your kids might end up. Mm-hmm. And now we're watching the crescendo of that in today's world, where now both men and women have both been convinced we don't need families, we don't need morals, we don't need decency, we don't need any of this stuff anymore. Just do whatever you want, do whatever feels good. And if anyone tells you any different, well, they're just slut shaming you, and you can make fun of them on Twitter, and that's okay. But I think what we're starting to see, and I think this is a somewhat new phenomenon, maybe over the last 3 to 4 years, really, and I think 2020 kind of pushed this, is that now we're starting to see that males and youth are starting to return to conservative principles. And I don't mean politically, I mean traditional family role principles. And there's actually a huge movement right now within the United States and even in other Western cultures to return to that traditional moral foundation of what it means to be a man. And I think that's why you're starting to see this bloom of young men wanting to get into the homesteading and get into firearms ownership and get into traditional roles. And it's still in its infancy. There's still problems, no one's saying there isn't, but I think we're starting to see the counter culture to what has become modern anti-male culture.
Yeah, I can't necessarily disagree with anything that you said there. I think it is pervasive, and I think it's a problem that will continue because there seems to be a desire from those that are putting out information to keep that message out there, to feminize men, or to make them so that they're not masculine. I think it goes almost even deeper than that with regard to when kids were in school, they wanted to put them on Ritalin.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And stuff like that. Your kid's fidgeting in his chair, so he needs to be medicated.
Right. Everything is ADHD.
That's what kids do, man. That's what they do. They're not designed to sit there and listen to your bullshit.
Right.
That they're not interested in, but yet that's what they were programmed to do. And then they were told, oh, well, we need to, maybe we can give him some medicine for that.
Right.
There's a lot that's been going on behind the scenes that have contributed to this.
Sure.
And I think, I don't know. What do you think the answer is?
Stop relying on the damn state. Stop relying on the state. When education was not so centralized, before the Department of Education, before you had stringent rules on what had to be tested for, You had one teacher in a frontier one-room schoolhouse teaching kindergarten through 12th grade, or whatever the equivalent was at the time. And at the time, you had kids who were speaking 3 languages, because French, English, and Spanish were all fluently spoken amongst the American peoples, because we had heavy influence from Spain and England from Europe, and we dealt with Spaniard-speaking peoples from the South, as well as Indian tribes who had some of that mixture in, right? A lot of kids back then spoke Latin still. Latin wasn't just the dead language of doctors, lawyers, and professionals. It was the language that people understood. And so when you would say the proper names of plants or animals or medications or whatever the case would be today in Latin, people back then probably would have understood what you were talking about a lot more than today. That all happened without a central state. But we are so intrinsically reliant upon the state that now the government has your kids for 12 years uninterrupted, with government-trained teachers who have been through government-trained or government-sponsored universities with government curriculums. And the government itself has become increasingly Bolshevik. It's progressive. The political right is every bit as much communist as the political left now. They just show it in a different way. And are we surprised that as our government has become increasingly more Bolshevik in their mentality, that all the little things that they have their hands in the jar now, from your highways to your schools, are being absolutely demonstrated as Bolshevik ideology?
Yeah.
That's number one. Get the state out of your life as much as possible and stop relying on them for everything. And I understand that everyone's at different levels, right? I'm not saying that if you don't feel qualified that you should just yank your kids out and start homeschooling. I'm not saying that everyone here who's still involved with the state at some level is wrong, but I'm saying that you should be working actively as a person into preparedness and homesteading and all of that to reduce your need for the state over time. And eventually, when the world doesn't just collapse out from under you because you've decided to do this, you'll be like, holy shit, I could have done this sooner. And the minute that light bulb clicks and you're like, holy shit, I could have done this sooner, then all of a sudden you're like, I can do more. And the minute you start getting that sense of empowerment, my gosh, you'll realize just how free you can be.
Yeah. I'm a recent convert to the idea of homeschooling, quite honestly, because I was someone who was raised in government school and whatever, and our kids went to government school, but things have changed most dramatically in recent years with regard to what's being taught. The curriculum is it's kind of getting really too far gone, because I was asking my children about that. I was like, hey, like, how was it when you were in school? Is it like, were you starting to see some of these things? And they were saying, yeah, right about the time they were in high school, they started to see some of those, progressive ideas coming in, not to the extent, obviously, that they are now, but it's
celebrated now.
I think it's one of the best things actually a parent could probably do at this point would be to yank their kids out of school. And I agree with you that some people are still invested into that because of their circumstance, and maybe their desire to keep their kids in that environment. But that's just my perspective, and I'm sharing it.
Yeah.
That from what I've seen, I'm not a fan at this point of what's being done to kids in government school. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the best things a parent could do, it would be one of the best gifts they could give their kid, would be to teach them the values and to teach them what's necessary to be a happy and healthy and productive human being.
Yes.
Because when you break it down and you look at the time spent that's required for what they do, you can do all of that and have the rest of your day to just like be a kid.
I'm kind of a fan
live
of
life
that.
And play and explore.
I'm
you
a
can
fan
do all
of
that
the
schoolwork
unschooling idea too.
What's that?
I'm kind of a fan of the unschooling idea. I don't know how I would practically implement it because I'm not good at, I'm not a teacher. It's something I need to learn to be better at. But the whole idea of unschooling is very popular, and at least in my little anarchist brain. I don't personally believe that kids need to be inundated with 17 different English courses, 45 history courses, 10 different math courses, 22 electives, a foreign language, and all this other stuff. I'm not saying you shouldn't be exposed to those things, but in the regimented way that government school does it, it's almost like why do you think all these kids are diagnosed with ADHD? It's because you're throwing 9 billion things an hour at them while expecting them to sit quietly with their hands folded on their desk, and they have to pee with permission, and they can only eat with permission, and they can only run around outside with permission, and they can only talk with permission. You're literally growing communism. You're growing the state. You are growing statist little drones who are just smart enough to pull a lever in a factory and fill a bubble on election day, but not smart enough to know why they're doing either one, because you inundate them with so much. And so this unschooling concept is very appealing to me, because there is no curriculum. There is no set schedule. You wake up, and that day, if the kid's like, Dad, I kind of want to look at math. Okay, so we look at math, and you teach them as they're willing to accept the teaching. And, part of that, I see where there could be some flaw with that too, but I think that there's definitely an answer somewhere in there, and I don't know that sitting them down for regimented 45-minute sections at a time with, a state approved schedule of classes that you have to have, or you don't get this magic piece of paper that says you're worth more than being a McDonald's employee all your life. I don't think that's the right answer either.
Yeah, I think there's some validity to that concept of unschooling, but as we talked about before earlier, structure is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't just allow kids to just like, oh, well, what do you want to do today? The whole Montessori type teaching philosophy, and kids, not all kids are going to flourish in that type of a unstructured environment.
Not all kids are the same. But
right.
That's an issue of leadership, though. It's the same issue that plagues all these prepper groups that materialize and vanish. Without good leadership, or let me take that back. Good leadership inspires good stewardship. So if you have dedicated parents, I could absolutely see how the Montessori system would work, because you're not dictating to your kids what to do, but you've learned how to motivate them into the way that they should go. Right? One of the greatest lessons I learned in the military was I can yell and scream and demand shit all day, and people would do just enough not to get in trouble. But if I created an environment where people wanted to participate and allowed them to naturally find their strengths, my team ran circles around people's teams because of that. Yeah. So I think that there's a mix.
Yeah, I agree. It's mind-blowing to me to realize, because as we were talking about, the kids are, they're in the class, they're moving around, they're disinterested, they're staring at the ceiling, they're, doing spit wads, whatever, being kids. And it's genuinely, I think, in most cases, because you're just not interested in it. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, and then you grow up, you're an adult, and you realize all the shit you learned in school, for the most part, is stuff you don't even use as an adult. Yeah. So what was the point of it? All the stuff that was compulsory that you had to learn and memorize and take a test is nothing that's benefiting you now in life. And a lot of it was just propaganda. A lot of the shit that they wanted to teach you about what happened in history was what they wanted to teach you about history, not what actually happened. They didn't want to teach you what actually happened. You didn't get to hear all the bad shit. You just got to hear the stuff that made you a good patriot.
Well, right. That's all history class in the government school is designed to do, is to airbrush the crap and to overly buff out the shine that really didn't exist on the good. And don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these modern folks who likes to, complain about my country's history. Look, America's no better or worse in the atrocities it did than anyone else. And I'm not going to be spoken to in the terms that some of these new progressives want to talk to me about. I don't care. I wasn't alive then. I had nothing to do with any of that. I've got 80 years to live my life. I'm going to try to live the best life I can, regardless of who's done what to whom in the past. So I'm not an apologist. I'm not one of those people who are like, oh God, I'm so sorry for what my ancestors were Italian that came over through Ellis Island in the 1900s, right? They escaped poverty in Italy. So I have nothing to apologize for. But at the same point, I can absolutely see the horrific things that happened during Manifest Destiny and the push west. And maybe we can just learn from that, but at the same point, not worship it or apologize for it and just accept that humans are flawed. And in the moment, people do the best that they can do, and they make a lot of stupid mistakes and even some bad mistakes and evil mistakes as a result. And government school isn't going to do that. They're just going to want you to salute, stand up, kneel, stand. It's like a Catholic wedding,
Hey man, that's too much of a balanced opinion. That's way too balanced, man. You need to pick a side.
Right.
What is it, red or blue?
The beauty of being an anarchist is no, I don't.
Oh, that's right. That's touche.
And you can't make me.
Yeah, I hear you, man.
I pick the side of righteousness, and I'm not trying to be preachy about that, but I pick the side that I believe is morally right. And if that puts me at a disadvantage, it puts me at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
I'm willing to be at a disadvantage for what I believe is morally right. I'm willing to argue with my friends for what I think is morally right. I'm willing to argue with my family about what I think is morally right. And, take it or leave it, I guess. We can still be friends after we disagree. I don't have a problem with that either.
Right. And if we can't, we can't.
Then it wasn't meant to be to begin with, and no amount of facade of perfection was going to fix that in the first place.
Right. One of the things that I think every generation witnesses, we're no different, is societal decay.
Yes.
Because when you get up a little age, you start to get gray whiskers or whatever, you start to sound like your grandpa. Right? You start, these kids,
that's not music.
Right.
Because it isn't.
I don't know if it's much different now, but I definitely don't see it ever going in the other direction. So it's always something that heads in a decay. It never hey, society is getting to be more moral. Society is getting to be better in a sense. There's always things that are being broken down, even though we're told we're progressing, right? We should be a progress.
You would think.
But what in your opinion is the greatest contributor to societal decay?
We're a flawed people. We are flawed by our very nature. And that's going to flesh itself out differently for different people. I myself am a non-traditional Christian. I believe in the fallen nature of man. And whether you accept that as a singular story in Genesis or more of an allegorical method, we are flawed creatures. At the end of the day, no one's born perfect. Perfection cannot be obtained. And Patrick and I actually have this conversation quite often, and him and I tend to always settle on the concept that there can be true evil in the world, but there's probably not very much true good, because everything we do at a base level does involve selfishness, because we are flawed people. Even the best things we do has a hint of selfishness. And I'm not always saying that selfishness is wrong. In the greedy sense it is, but in the sense of self-preservation, it's not always wrong. So we might make friends with somebody out of a sense of self-preservation, even if that's way back here and you don't even realize you're doing it. So you're not going out of your way to be nice to somebody just out of the goodness of your heart. There's always going to be a selfish motivation. And because we have those base animal instincts stemming from whatever you want to call it, we are a flawed species. And the laws of entropy clearly state that any system that is not acted and buttressed against will be in a state of decay. And I think our problem as people is that we over buttress and we over stimulate and we try to overly correct. And so we end up doing the exact opposite. You're like that person who always tries to fix your friends' arguments. And so you try to jump in the middle and be the peacemaker, and all you ever do is make it worse. That's people. That's what we do. We make things worse because we're pretty dumb and stupid and selfish and all sorts of things, even at our best moments. It's easy to be evil. It takes no effort to be evil. It takes no effort to be lazy and not take care of your family and to steal from other people. It takes no effort to do the wrong things in life. It takes effort and work to be a moral person. And because people shy away from work, especially as society becomes progressed. As you progress, so creature comforts go up. As creature comforts go up, guess what? Your work ethic tends to go down, because now you're not worrying about where your next meal is coming from. You're not worrying about whether or not the air conditioner is turning on. You're not worrying about where your home is going to be. You're not worried about, attacks from native tribes. You're not worried about wolf attacks or polar bears or whatever, lions and tigers and whatever else. So as society progresses, we become more lazy. And as we become more lazy, it becomes even easier to do the wrong thing. And I think that's just the way it works.
Yeah. I think that that's something I've often said too, is I agree with you that people are selfish and they're acting in their own self-interest.
Mhm.
Because even if they say they're doing it for, hey, I'm doing it for grandma.
Right.
Well, you wouldn't be doing it for grandma if you didn't think it was good for you too.
Right.
Right.
How many
So
people go to Goodwill and drop off their charitable donation and then as they're walking out, ask for the tax deduction slip?
yeah. Or just the mere fact that a person goes and gives somebody $5, all right, gives the homeless person $5. They're getting something out of that. They're getting the feeling that they've done something good for somebody.
Sure. Altruism feels great.
There's an element of selfishness there. It's not they're just doing something. Oh, I'm being philanthropic. I'm just giving my money away.
Yep.
No, you're getting something out of that. You're
Sure.
getting the sense, the gratitude that, oh, I helped that person. I'm a better person. I can pat myself on the back, or I can, whatever.
Well, right. And in today's world, you can do it on TikTok or Instagram and make yourself look really cool to millions of people instantly and get 1 billion thumbs up. I mean,
yeah.
It's a dopamine drug cycle that we become addicted to.
Yeah. What's Tag got to say here? It says, one of the best gifts we can give society is to look out for ourselves and our people. This gift of self-reliance sets the tone and empowers people to not look at the state for our needs. Right? I would have to agree with that. Yep. Yeah.
There she is, Tag. She's coming for you.
Yep. Take care of yourself and that of your children. How about that? It's
we have to embrace our nature to an extent where we understand ourselves. And when you understand yourself and you understand your limitations, you can then find ways to press those limitations and make yourself better.
Yeah. Skane's girl said this. We were talking about the public school system earlier and homeschooling. And she says, I think it's difficult with a lot of parents to homeschool because they use public school as a babysitter. Well, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I know that my parents did, and not anything against them, but they were both working outside of the home. And, I think at some point we got this idea sold to us that the two income family,
right,
women empowerment, as you alluded to earlier, right? Women started working outside of the home, which that's fine. But I think it's also fine that somebody's home for the children so that the children actually have parents and they're not shipped off to strangers and a bunch of kids that they probably wouldn't want to hang out with,
mm-hmm.
For those many hours.
I would suggest to men that they encourage their daughters to learn skills, because if you give your little girls the sense of fulfillment and knowledge that they've learned how to run a power drill or how to run it or fix a lawnmower or change a tire. And I'm using stupid little examples, but you understand, you teach them real skills so that maybe for them, they don't have to find the fulfillment outside the home. They find their fulfillment at home doing all the same stuff the dudes are doing. The whole thing with women going outside the home, it is seen by so many as this empowerment thing for women, but all it did was make it where the government can now tax you. Congratulations on your equality. Well done. But when women held all that power in the home and they could do all these things that, quite frankly, the dudes weren't doing or couldn't do because they had to be outside the home earning a living, they were super powerful at that point, and they were told that they weren't. And the net negative now is that we have children being raised by TVs and the government so that people can feel empowered. Well, why do you need to feel empowered? Because, we have a deep sense of desire to be empowered. And I completely sympathize that people need to feel empowered, but find your empowerment in things that are healthy for your family. Find your empowerment in things that are healthy for your society.
Yeah, I think, there's kind of also the other aspect to that, though, is a lot of women were in relationships, and that's an unfortunate situation that they were in a relationship where the men held the purse strings, so to speak, and they were stuck at home dealing with, raising the kids or cleaning and cooking. And just, I can understand why women would want that empowerment, but
I
at the same
do.
time, it could be switched. The roles could be
Yeah,
reversed. The
sure.
woman could go out and make the bucks, go make the money. I'll stay home and
Mhm.
mow the lawn and, take care of the kids and do whatever. I mean, that role can be reversed. I
I
think
think
it's
that was brought
important.
on by the state too, though.
Yeah.
Think about when you started hearing those complaints. You didn't hear those complaints until a post-Korean War society. You might have heard a few, but for the most part, people were pretty content with traditional roles until about the Korean War. Well, why is that? Maybe it's because you had three massive wars that happened all in the span of 35 to 40 years that destroyed the minds of most working men who were shipped off to World War I and World War II and then the Korean conflict. Then you had Vietnam right after that. When you have a statist society that completely rapes its men of all of their innocence by shipping them off to war in a constant state of combat, those guys are going to come home broken. They're going to turn to drugs, alcohol. They're going to be abusive. They're going to be all sorts of negative things. You notice you really didn't have a whole lot of that complaint back in the day when we weren't such a warlike society.
It's pretty easy to send people to war when it's not your kids they're sending, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an unfortunate thing I just wanted to throw in there.
Think about some of your tribal societies, even like in South America specifically. They've discovered tribes over time that don't have any of these paradigms. They don't have wars or militaries or governments or states or any of this sort of stuff. Everyone just does their part, and people tend to be very content in those societies. And when you bring them all these doodads and knickknacks, they kind of look at you like you're crazy. Like, what's this? What am I going to do with this? How does this collect water from the river? How does this catch fish? How does this, protect my child? How does this sharpen my spear? Whatever. And again, I'm giving a very 1,000-yard view of it. But when you look at some of the most contented societies in life, it's because they didn't have all the entrapments of a progressive society.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, man. Tag says, if we could drive prices up, we could create an equality fight between men and women. Maybe, just maybe, we could build loyalty to the state and away from each other.
Damn it, Tag.
Oh, man. I taught my granddaughter to visit. Oh, excuse me. I taught my granddaughter this visit to use a nail gun. She was scared at first, but once she tried it, she wanted to nail all the trim. Yeah.
Teach
Yeah.
your kids
Super cool,
skills,
man. Super cool to teach young people skills, because they are definitely sponges for knowledge. And it's really our job as the elders to show them.
Yes.
And yeah, there's a lot of things that I learned from my dad. And, I hope that I was able to pass some of those things on to my children. But it's our job as parents to teach. And that doesn't necessarily just mean the handiwork. It means all of the work, how to interact in society and how to be a good person that's moral and all of those things, ethical. And it's our job. And so when you have kids, you think you would want to spend more time with them, and I think we've been sold this bill of goods that you got to go out and earn the bucks. And, I fell into that in my early years, being the person that's always gone. I was gone a lot, but that's the nature of my job. And, yeah, it's just one of those things that we all have choices to make and kids to raise. So that time comes and goes quick, man, doesn't it?
It does. And rather than live with regret, just try to be a better man today than you were yesterday, man.
Yeah.
As I always say, don't be sorry, just be better.
Yeah, no, there's nothing I can do to change any of those things. You get to a point in life though, where you look back and oh, I could have done this different, and you don't make excuses or feel bad for it, because it just is what it is. But, yeah, you hope you're able to instill that, or maybe share that with somebody else so that they will maybe take something from that, because everybody tells you, oh man, your kids grow up quick. Yeah, guess what?
Mhm.
They grow up quick. Right?
Yeah, I've gone through 4 of them little guys and gals, and my youngest is 8, and we butchered a pig this past weekend.
Nice.
And he was right in there cutting up the meat, grinding meat at 8 years old. He wants to do stuff. He's like, Dad, can I do this? Dad, can I do this? And half the time my first reaction is, no, man, we just got to get it done. And then like, I'm teaching myself to not do that. I'm teaching myself to be like, you know what? Sure.
Yeah.
Here's the sharpest Mora knife in my collection. This is how you don't mess your hands up, and turn it into a lesson that not only teaches how to butcher the pig, but some dexterity and some intricate knife working. And he didn't cut himself. He did just fine.
Right. Right. What Tag says here, he said that homemakers to be revered. It used to be an honor to be called a wife and a mother. In my house, B is worshipped as she should be. What a shame that we have taken that from women.
100% agree with that.
Yeah.
100% agree.
And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with regard to the feminization of men, or the decline of the American male. And I think it speaks broader to the decline of all of the traditional roles that have been a cornerstone of any society.
Yep.
Right? You have to have that balance. You have to have, you can't have 2 people wearing the pants, right? You can't have 2 men. I mean, I guess you could if you're, but I'm just saying, in a traditional,
you do you, boo.
you're right. In a traditional relationship, there needs to be that balance.
Sure.
Of, I do this, you do that, and that's what makes a relationship work. So, yeah.
Look, if the man is the head of the home, then the wife is certainly the neck, and the head turns the direction the neck tells it to. Being the head of the house or being the man or all this stuff should not be seen as a privilege. It should not be seen as a position of authority. It's a burden. It's a job. And I think that what we saw, I think what you were referring to earlier, is there was definitely a shift in American culture in the post-nuclear society where all of a sudden head of home became an authority thing. And I think you had a lot of fundamentalism at the time that kind of rushed in there and brought that American awakening, if you were. I think it went horribly wrong. And I think you had this concept that this gives me privilege and this gives me power and this gives me authority, and you will do as you're fucking told, and I don't think you can do that. I think you have to understand that these positions are not positions of authority at all. They're positions of servitude to your family.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I don't know, man. I feel like an old man with some of my views. I'm just like kind of shaking my head. Like when I see stuff, what kids are doing, and I'm just like, gosh, dang it, man. Where'd we go wrong?
I went back and look. I have a friend. He's much more left on the spectrum. He's probably one of the few friends I have that's left, but he's a very good dude, and we can actually have conversations about these things without hating each other. It's a very great relationship. And he kind of made the mention once upon a time when he was here about how it does seem that we're all acting like old men, but at the same point, the change between his generation, because he's a little older than me, his generation and my generation is much less than the difference between my generation and my child's generation, right? All these generations for a long time kind of stair-stepped and broadly crept up. 2000, man, everything just went, and that change, the minute the cell phone and the computer was introduced, society is changing much more rapidly. And so therefore the progressivism is changing much more rapidly. So that dope chart's now peaking, right? And so it's very easy for you and me and Tag and those and my other buddy, regardless of our political affiliations or our particular systems of belief, to all kind of be like, we're all acting like old men now, because now everything has changed so drastically that we're not seeing the paradigm shift the way your parents did or their parents did. There wasn't much of a change from World War I to World War II, right? The machine gun fed from this direction instead of this direction. That was about the extent of warfare changes from the world wars. But from the war on terror to what's going on in Europe now we've gone from tanks and submarines to drones and hypersonic weapons in the course of 20 years. We're watching a drastic uprising in technology. And I think that that's what's correlating to guys like us feeling like old men in our 40s and 50s as opposed to our 60s and 70s, because things are changing much more drastically today.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. The computer and the cell phone are the two things that have created the most change in our lives, without question.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't say that it's not, because the internet coupled with a personal device that's a tracking device that goes everywhere with you and you look at 100 times a day, has influenced our lives in ways we just can't even imagine. And it's only going to ramp up from here. Artificial intelligence is something that's going to be on the horizon. That's already, a part of our lives, but it's going to affect us in ways, I think, that people have yet to foresee. And it's really it's going to be a big change and a big shift in everything.
I promise you that AI generated deep fake video technology is going to radically change the face of the Justice Department and court proceedings and law enforcement. People are going to be able to be so easily accused of things at any point that isn't even real. It was created on a computer somewhere. And Moonsprout is 100% correct. I personally believe that transhumanism is the agenda. And that's a whole nother can of worms we can't get into tonight.
So yeah, that's going to take it down a whole nother rabbit hole, man.
That's a Rumble conversation only.
Right. Oh man. Hey, so let me switch the topic on you real quick, Bobby.
Yeah.
What's the most often overlooked prep?
Two things: feminine hygiene products and waste removal technologies. Anybody can stack beans in water. Anyone can put cans of aspirin back. But how many people understand what septic is, what septic shock is? How many people understand what it's like to not have running water? How many people understand what it is to not have the trash trucks running every week? How many people realize you cannot just burn your trash indefinitely? What are you going to do when there's no trash trucks and no water? How are women going to handle their monthly cycle? How are you going to handle refuse? How are you going to handle biological material that has to go somewhere? No one talks about that. Well, I shouldn't say no one. Hardly anyone does. Everyone wants to do top 10 guns for preppers. What's in your EDC? Bug out bag, bug out bag, bug out bag. And that's all anyone wants to talk about.
Yeah.
No one talks about feminine hygiene and waste disposal technology.
Yeah. Another one too, I'll throw on top of you there is kids' clothes.
Sure.
Right? If you got a family, do they have enough of their stuff put back?
Right.
Because they're going to grow, right?
I have this habit whenever I go to places like Walmart or Dillon's or Hy-Vee or whatever, I always hit the clearance racks. And like today, I texted my whole group. Walmart next to me has packs of men's underwear, normally like $20 on sale for $7 on clearance. So I text my group, hey, come check this out.
Yeah.
If they were in my size, I'd have picked up 2 pairs and thrown them in a wall locker somewhere, Anytime that, like at the end of the season, when little kids' boots are on clearance at the end of the winter cycle, buy them all. It doesn't matter what size they are. Someone's kids are going to need them because children's footwear is stupid expensive.
Yeah. That's something that's like overlooked. Like you say, there's always the traditional things that people prep for. And
guns are sexy.
Yeah.
Homemade feminine napkins are not sexy.
I'll take it a step further again. And it's something that really doesn't even hardly cost much, but just your physical fitness and nutrition, right? Eating the right things and exercise, because everybody talks about, beans and bullets and Band-Aids, but they never talk about strength, flexibility, and endurance.
Right.
But it's damn important to be able to get around and damn important to have your health. So I don't know. It's something I think about and try to incorporate into my preparedness.
I agree.
But I know that it's not for everyone.
Yep. Test your stuff too. That's how you're going to find out your 60-pound bug out bag was the worst decision you ever made in your life. Go walk with that thing for, 8 hours.
Yeah.
Come back and then tell me why my 35-pound bag trumps your 65-pound bag any day.
Yeah.
You have to test your stuff. You got to use it. You got to put it on and break it. Because if you're afraid to break it now, then you don't have any faith in it. You don't have any faith in it because you didn't use it and realize it wasn't going to break.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, Bobby, it's been great, man, chatting with you. I really wish we could have had Patrick on tonight as well, but maybe we'll have to do this again sometime when he's free, and
Absolutely.
we can have a conversation. I appreciate you coming on again. And we already talked about Midwest preparedness, so we don't need to plug that unless you want to talk about it anymore, or you have anything else you want to leave folks with as far as a good word.
Yeah, just go to the website, midwestpreparednessproject.com, or all of our social media. We're on MeWe, Freesteading, Facebook, the artist formerly known as Twitter. I don't know what the hell, the X. And we're on Rumble and YouTube. Show is October 2nd through the 8th. We're about to announce the schedule, so stay tuned. Other than that, everybody in here who's got a channel, tag Grumpy, Chuck Peoples, Skeins, Potpourri of Life, Leather Homestead. All these folks are friends of mine, and they all have great content. If you want to see some stuff that's just not the same old prepping nonsense, go check out all their channels.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to end it. And I really appreciate everybody that was in the chat tonight. It was a nice, lively discussion with Bobby. Always welcome on this program. And yeah, guys, we're going to end it on that and go out and be better tomorrow than you were today. And remember, homesteading is not harmful content.